Hey, Paul.
Hey Fab, how's it going?
Good.
Oh,
There you go.
Like our, how come I don't see you?
Oh,
There we go.
There you go. I was hiding.
You're hiding. Although we are in the same room. Sorry, Fab. He come into my camera. It's like, hey, that's dangerous. There you go.
There you go.
It's our first podcast in person since I think 2019.
Yeah, since COVID.
Yeah,
You used to always do them in person.
Yeah, you used to come to my office. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've done it again. So I don't know if Fab wants to make a habit of this.
No, it's confusing, brain.
He doesn't know if you're looking here or there. So today we want to talk about are you asking the wrong questions?
Yeah.
And it's Fab and I have talked about this in the past, probably in a few separate episodes about the discovery phase, which is probably the most important phase of any sales process. And also, I think operationally, it's something that should exist in your CRM, your sales process. So it is something I think that can be revisited over and over. And the reason I was telling Fab before offline, why to bring this up is I went to a sales conference and someone was saying that clients get annoyed with when you ask too many questions, and I think that kind of skirts the issue. I think the real issue is, are you asking the right questions? Because if you're asking the right questions, then your client or prospect wants to answer you, right? Then they're not going to be annoyed by a question if it's relevant to them.
Yeah, I get that. I think, and that's, my point of view, obviously, is that, asking questions is, operationalizable, and we'll talk about that. But, it's also an art, right, to it, because you have to be able to, quote unquote, read the room. You know what I mean? Like, and I know we've talked about this before, and I'm trying to remember which episode it was, but
probably 200 episodes ago.
Like every buyer's different, and some buyers have already purchased. Let's stick with an example that I know. Let's say we're talking about CRMs, right? Let's say I'm a revenue leader and I've been doing this for 40 years, right? I've bought CRMs before. I know what I want. I know how I work. I know the functionalities that I need. And so it can be frustrating if the salesperson you're talking to is trying to ask you all these questions that you deem irrelevant, right?
Yes.
Because like I know the salesperson. I know why. Yeah. I know it's going to help my revenue. I know which reports I need. Like, you don't need to dive into. I just have very specific questions.
Yeah.
Because
you want to skip to the chase, right? It's like, hey, I don't want to be talking about all the things that you think you need to go through in your sales process. I know what I want. Just skip to the chase. When can I get it? What does it cost? What do we need to set up, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's where I'm wondering if that's in part what that study you were referring to is talking about, right? Where it's like,
I think so.
Because if I'm talking to an experienced buyer, and not necessarily a buying role, but a person, buyer, the person who you're talking to, you don't need to be, like, are you aware, how do you track your reps' success? Or how do you know if your reps are on target or not on target? Or can you measure the impact of your marketing campaigns? And can you know what I mean? Like, that's you ask those types of questions to a buyer, like a prospect, who doesn't really know what they're buying.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. And there's only one thing I don't agree with you. I don't think it's sort of a mystical art. I think there's method to the art. So if we consider that the art we're talking about is how to judge what is a good question and why we're asking that question, I believe that's what it's all about. And it really boils down, and you've heard me say this a million times, and it's the name of our podcast, Ask the Right Questions.
Yeah.
It's not a list of questions. It's if your first questions I believe are more open-ended, and you're getting your prospect to talk about what's important to them, they're going to want to answer, and you're not going to have to ask a million questions because you're asking the questions that matter to them. And one of my favorite questions to start is, Mr. and Mrs. Prospect, what are your expectations for our call today? What are your expectations for our session? And usually you start setting objectives. You're saying, well, the objective is, I want to know this, this, and that. So already you're off to the right races. So there's no art there. It's just asking the question.
Yeah.
And then if the person says, well, I've done all my research, I know exactly what I need to know about the CRM, and I'm ready, and I know I want this. My only question is, should I take the this package or that package? And then you can skip to the chase because you've taken the time to listen.
Yeah.
Now, if you're just going off, you rattle off your list of questions, then for sure you're going to annoy them.
Yeah. And I mean, as much as learning how to ask questions is not easy, right? And that's where you come in usually with your clients. So it can be comforting for a rep to have a list of questions. Yeah, I definitely think it's the wrong way to go. I think you need to have, I don't know, what's helpful for me, and maybe you'll tell me not to stop doing that, but is like having general ideas of what I need answered. I find that helpful because then it kind of guides me and so on and so forth. But I remember we had a show not long ago, or an episode not long ago, and you said, like, if you forget to ask a question, you could book another meeting. You could even send some of those questions off by email if that makes sense. And at the end of the day, you're trying to figure out if what you're selling, whether it's a service or a product, is a right fit for this person, right? And what do you need to understand to be able to do this?
And you're right, Fab, because it's okay to have a list of things you want to discover, but just not questions. So you do want to navigate. So in whatever you're selling, if you need to find out specific things, requirements, well, then you need to ask those questions. And you can even tell your clients, hey, look, there's a few things I would need to know to better, serve you eventually. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? That way it doesn't feel like an interrogation, and it feels to the client that you're finding things out that matter, that are going to matter to them. So it's all in the way you set it up. But what it is if you're really trying to figure out what their objectives are, what their motivation is, well, you might have something on your board that says, figure out the motivation. Yeah. Well, how do you do that? You just dig deeper to find out what it means to them, or what matters to them, and why they're trying to do what they're trying to do.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, so let's go back to who we're talking to here, which is sales leaders. As a sales leader, what can you do to help your team make sure they're asking the right questions, or avoid asking the wrong questions? I'm going to look at it.
I think if you categorize it, we've talked about this before. I think if you categorize it, well, you need to discover the challenge. Why is your client actually talking to you? And then what is the need and the want? And then what is the motivation? So if you have those three categories, and it's sort of like a depth meter, right? So if you just stay at the top, you're just figuring out the challenge. So let's say you're selling CRMs. Well, they need a CRM because they don't have a CRM, and the sales leader wants to know. Yeah. And then the need is, okay, once you have that, Mr. Sales Leader, what does that permit you to do? So that's the kind of question you need to ask, the kind of thing you need to discover. So fixing your problem, or figuring out a solution, or creating the opportunity, what does that enable you to do? And then they'll answer. It could be a million things. It can be business growth. It can be real estate growth. It can be selling the company. It can be buying another company. It can be hiring more employees. You don't know, right?
Right.
And then once they answer you that, say, hey, once you're able to do that, what does it permit you to do? So it's just digging deeper and really staying on the path of what matters to your client.
Right.
It's sort of like when you were a kid and someone asks you, what do you want to do when you want to grow up? And you said, I want to be a fireman. Well, why do you want to be a fireman? Oh, I love the idea of putting out fires because it's so much fun, and I love playing my hose in the backyard.
Yeah.
Okay, and I like driving trucks. Okay, so, and my motivation is to drive trucks all day and to play with fire hoses, because you're a 5-year-old kid, whatever.
Right.
So you're it's maybe a bad example, but anyways, you're going deeper into figuring out what the business motives are, because you're fixing something, we'll call it on the surface, a challenge. It's very important, but really you're part of the whole business pie, and what you're trying to do is go deeper. So all that to say, to the business leaders, what I would say is role play with your team to make sure that they know how to get to that motivation.
Right.
And usually what I've found is the people that do it the best are the people that ask the least questions, but they ask good questions, And good questions are usually open-ended questions based on what the person just answered you.
Yeah.
Or what they just said.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's, yeah. And I mean, I think we said it a million times, right? Then there's all the training and all that stuff and the coaching and the role playing and all that things that go in. Obviously on the HubSpot CRM side, there's always the, like setting up your sales pipeline with, your required information and your playbooks and all that stuff in there. I mean, I think that at this point is kind of repetitive if you've been listening to other shows, which you should be. But
it's not repetitive. It's a reminder. It's like going to the gym. Sometimes you have to do the same exercise.
You do have to do the same exercise. And I think that's what's critical. I think it's, but here's a question for you. If you were a sales leader, how would you know, or how would you go about finding out if you have a question problem, quote unquote, right? If my reps are in fact asking wrong questions, like what would be a symptom that my reps are asking wrong questions?
That's a good question, Fab. The symptom usually is when you're not finding out what is necessary for you to help your client, or when you're getting clients that are visibly or body language wise getting annoyed by your questions. And you can tell if you're leading an interrogation, your client's going to feel it, and you're probably going to get some kind of negative reaction. So I believe that knowing how it's wrongly done is, well, it's going to affect your whole sales process too. You're going to get less. You're going to get less closing. You're going to get more people say, "Well, I'm just not interested." And it's interesting because I was talking to a colleague of ours who's also a sales coach. And she was saying yesterday that when she starts her sales coaching or sales training, she talks about two different guys. We'll call them George and John. And George is the guy you meet in an evening. You're just meeting him at a party or whatever. And George tells you everything about his life. I've got a great job. I've got 2 kids, and George just talks to you and in the conversation, and he asks you one question. And then John's the guy who asks you a lot of questions. Hey, I've got 2 kids, but how many kids do you have? What do they do? You're showing interest in the person. So it's the same thing with any human being. If you're showing interest in the prospect's reality and what really matters to them, and they don't feel that you're just trying to sell them something, they're going to want to deal with you. Right. Now, how do you notice you're not doing that correctly? Usually it's reps talking too much or too quickly about the solution.
Right.
It's reps asking 3 questions. Hey, do you have a problem with your CRM? Yeah, I do. What's your problem? The reps don't fill it in. And then the rep talks for like 15, 20 minutes about their CRM and how great it is and everything it does. And he launches into a spontaneous demo rather than taking the time a little bit more to find out. Now it's different. Listen, in the demo world, it's different if someone's booked a demo and said, I want a demo. We're not talking about that. We're talking about you prospecting in a more traditional way.
Yeah, but I think even the demo, right? Like you could say that, yes, it's important. They're asking for a demo. They want to see your platform or whatever. But part of that is also asking questions, right? But you need to know if it's a good fit.
Yeah.
Right. It's easy to say like, hey, yeah, we do email sequencing for salespeople. But you have to understand if is that important for the client? Is it
so you
not?
should be asking a few questions. Yeah.
Right. So it's just you're showing something at the same time.
And Fab, there too. So let's say the person, let's take an extreme case. A person came off your website and they answered a little questionnaire. You can ask them 4 or 5 questions.
Yeah.
And then maybe they book a demo directly. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. So I'm not talking about that. But if you are in a traditional prospecting mode, don't shoot off into demo mode before you understand what the client's requirements are.
Yeah.
And you have, honestly, the only way to do that, and you asked a very good question, is to either go on the road with your reps, but that's pretty risky because they might be burning potentially good clients. So I would say the best way to do it and to not burn potential clients is do role plays, and there's an advantage to the sales leader and there's an advantage to the rep because the rep's not losing business and the sales leader is getting a chance to train and coach on, like what we were saying last week, real life situations.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. To me, it makes sense. I was asking that question because I'm always trying to help the sales leaders I work with help identify where their issues are through reports and data. So that's definitely interesting. I think one thing that I jotted down because I kind of heard you talk about between the lines is also like deals that move very quickly in the sales process. Like if you're just like asking through 3 questions, we sell CRMs, and then
I'm ready to close now.
And then move to the next day, like here's a proposal, and you know what I mean, like those.
And then they stay in your pre-close stage for 6 months. Right?
Yeah.
No, for sure. And that's a good point. And that we probably should make this a full podcast one day. But how to make sure that your sales process and the milestones in your process reflect the reality of your deals is important. And I always say this, and I say it a lot. I'm a big gabber myself, and the thing that helped me the best in sales when I was a salesperson is when I finally learned to listen. And I wasn't always stressed out about wanting to close, and that it's such an important factor, and it gets repeated so often, and it's just hard to do because as human beings, it's not in our nature to listen. It's in our nature. It's in our nature to talk. So if you can, if you're a smart enough rep to make your client talk with the right questions, they're never going to think you ask too many questions. Unless you ask the same question again, if you weren't paying attention, that'll annoy clients too. Same question twice. I already answered that.
And that's why that's definitely important when we're talking about sales process. Like if you're a company that has multiple sales roles, so you'll have like kind of a sales development rep that transfers stuff over to an account executive and making sure that the questions are being asked and the information is being transferred over, so that the prospect doesn't feel like they're just wasted their time with rep number 1 because now they have to repeat everything. That's a good point. Something I wanted to say too, but now it slipped my mind. I like what you said when help reps not being afraid of not closing, because I think that's a big one, right? Like we, as a rep, we all have our pipelines, we all have our numbers, we all have our targets, and if we look at it badly, not well, it could be like, wow, the more deals I move quickly, the more I'll achieve my targets. And that's obviously, like as you just mentioned before, counterproductive. So
that's like, imagine you're trying to fill a water bottle with a hose that's got a ton of pressure, no water goes in. So you're better off to move it properly so that the flow is natural. But I think that comes back to sales leaders, because if sales leaders are saying, come on, when are you closing? And if you are encouraging that bad behavior, well, then you're going to get the behavior. You get the behavior you encourage as a sales leader. So if you're continuously telling your people, come on, I want to see more deals, and you're not making sure that they're actually carrying those deals through the proper place, then it's like having 10 people with a sandwich board on the sidewalk trying to convince people to buy expensive Mercedes, we call it G-Wagons, you're using the wrong approach to try to get, maybe with your sandwich board, you'll get one person in a year that'll walk into your dealership, but there's much better ways of doing it. So it's basically applying the right methodology throughout your sales process to have them move at the proper pace.
And definitely we'll definitely do a show on how to set up your sales process or your methodology so it reflects kind of your purchasing, your sales approach, and also your client's experience, right? Obviously we've been working on this together, but what I found was helpful for me is when I really flip the table around, like what's my client expecting at each stage of the process, and figuring out if there's a match or mismatch between what I needed, and I find like the sales process now is a lot more, for me anyway, intuitive, because it's in line with what reps are with buyers or clients or prospects are expecting as well. So that's definitely
and you said something really important. I want to go back to the beginning of the podcast when you said, well, I have a list of things that I want to discover. And you know what? If you have that list of things up to discover in your sales process, and then you're going to ask those right questions, well, then you're operationalizing that, and then it's going to come up to you when the person's talking. You say, oh, he just answered that one. You'll check it off. And you'll say, but he didn't answer me the one about, is the investment worth the trouble that he's looking to look for, or what's the value of the problem they're looking for. And then at the end you say, hey, Mr. Client, there's something that I have discovered, can I ask you, what's the impact what's the financial impact of this problem? And then you get your answer.
Yeah.
And that's me. Some people say there's studies that show that open-ended questions are not necessarily better than closed-ended questions. I have a hard time with that myself, because I think if a properly staged open-ended question is much more likely to get an answer that can go in any direction, and allowing your prospect to talk about what matters to them.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would like not necessarily push back, but I would maybe add like color to that, which is like, again, what we were saying before, right? Like every buyer's in a different state of mind when they're talking to you, right?
You're
and
right.
Like,
You're
and
right.
an open-ended question to somebody who's just like, I've bought this software I've bought HubSpot a ton of times before in the past. I just need to validate what your pricing is.
Yeah.
I know exactly what I need.
Yeah.
If you're going to spend time like, well, what's your business objective, and what's
hey, piss off, I want to buy this.
Exactly.
And you're right. And that's why your first question when you first talk to your client, and they say to you, and they walk into whatever, whether they reach out to you or you reach out to them, and they say, hey, you say to them, hey, what brings you here today? Why are we having this conversation? Well, I know exactly what I want. Well, then you can skip to the right question, because you're paying attention.
Yeah.
And we both have the guitar behind us, so I'll use that analogy. If you have someone who just wanders in the music store and you say to them, hey, what brings you here today? And they say, well, actually, I want this brown guitar with a lighter color in the middle. I want it to be a Stella from the 50s. Okay, boom. Then all of a sudden you know what you're selling. But if it's, I'm not sure what I want, then you can ask him more questions to find out, well, does he want to buy a guitar? Does he want to buy drums? Does he want to buy a horn? Does he want to buy a bass? Like, so so it's a perfect example to what you're saying. You're going to ask one probably more generic open-ended question to then that person, or she'll bring you to exactly where it is that you need to be, if she knows exactly what she wants. Right. If she doesn't, then you're gonna have to dig more.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why those first questions are so critical, because they do help. And I think I mean, what you were talking before, like the situation, like what's going on, it will give you a good idea of what, or like the way you asked it, which was like, what are you expecting from this call, or something similar. I think that goes. You need to listen, as we said. I remember sitting on a call at one of the companies I worked at. So this was before I was on my own, and the rep started with that, and then the client said, well, I'm looking for XYZ, right? And that was part of what we were offering, but we were also offering ABC. And so then the rep didn't listen and just went into a whole like, well, here's what we do, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and like, oh yeah, and by the way, we also do X, Y, Z, right? So not at all listening to what.
And then what is the client first thinking? Well, he's not listening to me.
Exactly.
Like, I don't feel like dealing with this person, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And we've talked about this before too. Emotions play a huge role in decision making. So if you feel you're not being heard by your rep, you're gonna be like, oh, this guy's turning me off, or this person's like totally turning me off. So even if they have what I need, I might even go try to buy it from someone else.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, Paul. This was an interesting experiment. Back live in person since COVID.
All right, Fab.
All right, Paul. This is good.
Yeah.
A lot of good insights. Thanks, everybody.
Fab's a lot better looking in the camera than I am. Ciao, everyone.
Bye.